a true story that happened somewhere in the forests of Canada.
Have you ever wondered what a person feels when they stand on the shore of a wild lake hundreds of kilometers from the nearest settlement and realize they are not alone? This is the story of a group of extreme fishermen who ventured deep into Canada, seeking adventure and the biggest catch of their lives. But instead of fish, they found something they thought was only a legend. The trip began like any other daring expedition. 4 men, each experienced in survival, loaded their gear into an old bush plane. Their target, a nameless lake on the map, surrounded by mountains and endless forest. Locals avoided it, not because of bad fishing, but because of whispered stories about strange shapes in the mist and footprints too large to belong to any man. They laughed off the warnings, assuming it was just another campfire myth. The promise of untouched waters and massive trout was far more enticing than ghost stories. The pilot dropped them at a crude shoreline and promised to return in 7 days. As the plane's engine faded, silence wrapped around them, broken only by the distant call of a loon. The first day was perfect. They set up camp, tested their lines, and filled the cooler with fish by evening. The air smelled of pine and cold water. But as night fell, the forest grew unnervingly quiet. No insects, no owls, just a stillness that pressed against their ears. Around midnight, they heard it a deep, guttural howl echoing from the far side of the lake. It wasn't a wolf. The sound was too deep, too long, carrying a strange vibration that seemed to rattle in their chests. The men froze, staring into the darkness beyond their campfire. One joked it must be a moose, but his voice cracked. Another muttered, "Moose don't howl like that." They stayed awake until the embers died, listening to the quiet return. At sunrise, they decided to explore the opposite shore. Paddling across the still water, they noticed strange drag marks along the muddy bank. Then they saw them, footprints, each at least twice the size of a man's, pressed deep into the wet earth. The stride was massive, as if whatever made them could cover ground faster than any human could run. They measured one print with a fishing rod over 20 inches long. The edges were crisp, fresh. One man suggested it was a prank, but no one could explain how someone could leave such prints in a place so far from civilization. They agreed not to mention it in camp, afraid to spook each other. But the unease stayed with them all day. That night, the sounds returned, this time closer. Branches snapping, heavy footsteps pacing just beyond the tree line. The men shone flashlights into the woods, but the beams seemed swallowed by the darkness. For a moment, 2 glowing eyes reflected back high off the ground, far higher than a man's head. Then they blinked and were gone. Sleep was impossible. They kept the fire blazing until dawn. When the light came, they found something new, a half-eaten fish from their cooler, torn apart as if by massive hands. Not claws' hands. The scales were scattered and the cooler's latch was snapped clean off. Whatever had come into their camp in the night had no fear. By the 3rd day, fishing no longer mattered. They stayed close to camp, constantly scanning the tree line. Every so often, they caught glimpses of a massive, dark figure slipping between trees, always watching, never approaching. The silence of the forest was now a constant reminder. They were deep inside something else's territory. One of them, Chris, decided they needed proof. That evening, he set up a trail camera near the prints they had found. They baited the spot with fish guts and waited in the dark, their campfire extinguished. Hours passed. Then, from across the lake, came the slow, rhythmic sound of something wading through shallow water toward them. The splash of each step grew louder, then silence. They strained their eyes and ears, holding their breath. A sudden, heavy thud landed just outside the circle of their camp. The stench hit them first a mix of wet fur and rotting vegetation. Then, a shadow passed across the moonlight, massive and hunched. Something exhaled, slow and deep. One man whispered, "Bigfoot." The word seemed to hang in the air, almost mocking them. The figure moved again, just at the edge of their vision. A faint growl vibrated through the ground beneath their boots. Then it was gone, vanishing into the forest without a sound, as if the trees themselves had swallowed it whole. By day 4, paranoia had set in. They heard it trailing them whenever they moved, matching their pace. Once, while gathering firewood, they found a crude arrangement of broken branches, forming a shape like a warning sign. They didn't know if it was meant to keep them away or to tell them they were already too deep to leave. That night, a scream tore through the air, so loud it seemed to shake the ground. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something older, something primal. The men clutched their rifles, but deep down they knew it wouldn't matter. You can't hunt something that has lived unseen for centuries. On the 5th day, they decided to pack up early, but their food supplies were scattered, their fishing lines shredded. In the mud beside their camp was a single, fresh footprint, pointed directly toward the lake. It was as if Bigfoot wanted them to follow, daring them to cross the water one last time. Against their better judgment, they did. The far shore was quiet, unnaturally so. Then they saw it just for a heartbeat. A massive figure, almost black against the green of the forest, stepping silently between the pines. The sunlight caught on its hair, revealing shades of brown and red. Then, like smoke, it disappeared. They stood frozen, debating whether to chase it. A branch snapped behind them. They spun around nothing. Just a whisper of wind through the leaves. But the feeling of being surrounded was undeniable. Every shadow looked like it could reach out and take them. Back at camp, they agreed to keep the fire burning day and night. Sleep came in short bursts, interrupted by distant splashes in the lake and the occasional crash of branches in the dark. It was as if Bigfoot was toying with them, keeping them too scared to rest, but too curious to leave. On the 6th night, one of them swore he saw it crouched at the water's edge, watching the reflection of the moon. Its massive hand trailed in the water, sending ripples across the surface. It sat there for minutes, unmoving, before slowly standing and fading into the trees like a ghost. They no longer spoke of catching fish. All conversations circled back to one question. What did Bigfoot want? Was it defending its territory, studying them, or waiting for something they couldn't understand? The answers never came, only more signs, fresh prints, torn bark, and the constant, unnerving presence just beyond sight. When the bush plane finally returned on the 7th day, none of them looked back at the lake. They loaded their gear in silence, each man carrying a different kind of weight. They had come for an adventure. They had found a legend. And somewhere, deep in that forest, the legend was still watching. Back in civilization, they avoided talking about what happened. The one photo Chris had deleted haunted him the most. At night, he dreamed of those glowing eyes, high above the ground, staring straight into him. Every morning, he woke certain that Bigfoot remembered him too. Months later, Chris received a package with no return address. Inside was a single muddy footprint cast in plaster. It was the same size as the ones they had seen at the lake. Attached was a note with just 3 words, "Still out here." Chris kept the cast hidden, but sometimes he took it out at night, running his fingers over the ridges and lines. He wondered how many others had been this close to Bigfoot, and how many had never returned to tell their story. The thought chilled him more than the coldest northern wind. And so the nameless lake in the Canadian wilderness remains untouched, its waters hiding more than fish. The forest still whispers at night, and the mist still hides shapes too tall to be men. Those who know stay away. Those who don't might find themselves standing on that same shore, realizing they are not alone.